Welcome, LBDA family, to session 15 in our 2024 webinar series, Empowerment Through Education. I'm Julia Wood, the Director of Professional and Community Education here at the Lewy Body Dementia Association. We started off this series back in January, February, discussing the power of purpose in supporting your quality of life. And today we'll be joined by my dear colleague and friend, Angela Lunde, to learn about how you can utilize mindfulness in your journey with LBD. So this is our presenter today, Angela Lunde, and we're going to have some panelists, Joan Karp and Richard Rubin, for that discussion. So just something I want to point out from the description of the webinar, we had planned to have some panelists with LBD. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. But what I'm promising you is that in 2025, I'm already scheduling that series. We will do a mindfulness session specifically for people with Lewy. So hang tight with me. All right, so a few words about LBDA before we get started. We are a nonprofit dedicated to optimizing the quality of life for those affected by LBD. We provide comprehensive education for the community and professionals in events like this, deliver compassionate support for those living with LBD, and strive to advance awareness and research. And so a few housekeeping items. You can select the show captions at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. So if you're on an iPad, that toolbar may be at the top of your screen. If you're on a computer or laptop, it's likely at the bottom. And you'll notice you have that show captions that you can launch anytime. There's also a resources tab that you'll notice. And when you select that icon, it's going to bring up over on the sidebar some downloadable resources, the slides for today's presentation. I promise they're there this time, and some other things that you might find of interest. And remember, you're welcome to submit your questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A icon. And following Angela's presentation and panel discussion today, we'll address a few questions from the audience. All right, so some exciting news to simplify webinar access. We've added a ribbon to the homepage. So if you go to that lbda.org, you'll see a little ribbon where you can find upcoming webinars and how to register, and also the link for our LBDA TV site, which is where all of the recordings are going to be held. So this presentation is being recorded, and if you're here, you registered, so you'll get a follow-up email in about 1 week with a link to that video, as well as the other resources included today. So lastly, when you leave the session today, a brief survey is going to appear asking for your feedback about today's presentation. Please take a moment to complete that survey for me and help inform our content for 2025. With that, I just want to remind you too, before we do a little poll, if you have questions, if you need support, if we can help in any way, please reach out to our Lewy line at 1-800-539-9767, or you can email support@lbda.org. Our amazing team of social workers, Brandy Hackett and Tori Ricci, are there to help you with whatever questions you might have. All right, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to see who's in our audience today. So we've got our attendee poll up. Take a moment here and let us know who's joining us today. So we typically have mostly care partners. We love that. And this is going to be geared towards you guys a little bit. I think you'll find, though, that Angela's experience with mindfulness is so rich. She can really speak to how beneficial mindfulness can be for both the care partner and the person with Lewy. All right, so we've got some healthcare providers with us too. Some of you are families or family members or friends, and we've got some researchers and scientists. Welcome. We love our scientists. So we'll take a minute here to let you guys complete this. As usual, our care partners are in the winning lead, but that's okay. All right, we'll give it just a little bit longer here. I think we just about got everyone. Excellent. Okie dokie. So definitely, overwhelmingly, we've got care partners in our audience, about 70%. We've got about 26% of you are people with Lewy or symptoms. We've got some former care partners in the audience. Welcome. About 12% are healthcare providers. And we've got some family members and some scientists. So I'll stop sharing that. All right, so now I'm going to give you a little bit about our presenter today. So, Angela Lunde is an associate in neurology and a co investigator in the Mayo Clinic's Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. She has spent her career alongside persons living with dementia and caregivers who have mentored her toward an empathetic understanding of the lived experience of dementia and the role of caregiving. Her research interest is in the emotional and quality of life factors experienced by those living with dementia and their caregivers, with a special focus on understanding the outcomes that matter most to them. Her numerous scientific contributions focus on care and support research, including cognitive rehabilitation and behavioral interventions that can optimize quality of life. She co authored the Mayo Clinic on Alzheimer's disease and other dementias in 2020 and authored the book Day to Day Living with Dementia, a guide for caregivers in 2022. Ms. Lunde has training in mindfulness based therapies, including mindfulness based dementia care, grief and loss, wellness coaching, dignity therapy, and yoga. She is a faculty member at the Presence Care Project, offering mindfulness based programs that aim to promote greater ease, enhanced well being, and resilience for people caring for those who are living with mild cognitive impairment and dementia. Welcome, Angela.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that, Julia. And thank you, the Lewy Body Dementia Association, for giving me this opportunity to spend some time with you, wherever you are, this afternoon. So I'm going to start with a practice that we often start with in our mindfulness programs. It's called arriving. And so to start, I'd just like you, if you're not already, to just get comfortable in whatever seat you're situated in right now. If you'd like, you can close your eyes. And I'm going to invite you to take a deep breath in through the nose and back out through the nose or mouth. And you are arriving just as you are. And for some of you, that may be feeling a bit worn out or distressed or tired. For some of you, you may be arriving in a place that feels magical. There's no right or wrong. Just know that you're here, surrounded by people who understand your situation. And as you're arriving, also acknowledging for yourself the effort that it took to be part of this webinar this morning or this afternoon. I know it's not always easy, especially those of you who are either living with Lewy or care partners, to schedule time to show up, to be present, and to put other responsibilities aside. And yet here you are. And now I invite you to turn inward. So we're going to turn inward with a sense of wonder and curiosity, to just pay attention to what's going on inside of us. And let's start by turning the attention to the breath. And begin to sense where you are feeling your breath. You may feel it in the belly, or the chest, or the nose, or the throat. Begin to notice where you feel your breath enter and where you feel it leave. Now bring your attention to your body, to just notice, what do you feel? Do you sense the weight of your body? Maybe your feet on the floor, your back supported perhaps by a chair. Your hands, maybe they're cool or warm, fingers open or curved. And with this attention turned inside of us or inward, just scan the body to notice places of comfort, discomfort, strain or stress. Is your belly relaxed or tight? What about your shoulders? Are they hunched up close to your ears or relaxed back and down? Your jaw? And dropping in to notice just how you're feeling right now. Calm, impatient, maybe worried or sad. You're just noticing what you're feeling without elaborating, without judging the feelings as right or wrong or good or bad. Just being present in this moment to explore what is. And finally, let's end with another deep breath in. And as you breathe deeply in, you're going to feel the belly rise and the chest expand, and then breathe out. Feel a softening, a grounding, and an arrival as you are now here present for all of us to share in this time and this space. So, as Julie mentioned earlier on the onset, my name is Angela Lunde. I'm here at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and am an associate in neurology working out of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. And our conversation today on resilience and mindfulness is one that's really near and dear to my heart, partially and mostly perhaps because of what I've seen it do in terms of truly supporting those impacted by dementia and their care partners on this often unexpected, undeserved course they find themselves in. And in a minute, you're going to meet a couple of individuals who truly have been my mentors and my teachers, as many caregivers have been throughout my 23 years that I've been involved in this work. You'll meet them a bit later, Richard and Joan, but I'm just going to take a moment at the top here to just tell you a little bit about each of them. Richard, who you're going to meet, is a classically trained chef and cookbook author. And Richard spent years exploring the wonders of the world's kitchens. For the past 5 years, he's been journeying with his husband as frontal temporal dementia informs their day. Together, they are learning to negotiate a new normal and working to find and continue to hold tight moments of joy and connectivity. And in a little bit, you're also going to meet Joan. And Joan is currently a fully dedicated care partner to her husband, Bruce, who is in the moderate to perhaps severe stages of Alzheimer's after being diagnosed in February of 2020. Both Joan and her husband, Bruce, had exciting careers on Wall Street where they met 38 years ago. Joan retired early at the age of 42, and she and Bruce have had many years together to enjoy friends, living in fun places around the country, and sharing passions. Their intense bond is a source of great strength during this quieter and more challenging time in their life. Joan and Richard, as I said, have been my teachers, my mentors. They have been sources of inspiration and support for me, probably in ways they're not even knowledgeable or they don't even recognize. And it was through a program that I'll be speaking a little bit more on today called Mindfulness-Based Dementia Caring that I had the opportunity to meet them. And you'll have the opportunity to meet them shortly. I'm going to share my slides with you and walk you through a little bit about mindfulness, talking about this topic of mindfulness and resilience, and then we'll return with Joan and Richard and have more of a conversation and a discussion. So when I think about resilience, I think of resilience as this quality which provides us an ability to protect our well-being in the face of challenging circumstances. It involves, I believe, adapting as best as you can to these challenges in the face of adversity, unexpected turns, and excess stress. And when Lewy body or another dementia enters your life, we know there is stress and there are challenging circumstances. I have had the opportunity over many years to connect with those who are living with Lewy and other kinds and causes of dementia. And I know that they struggle. And one of the things that I'd like to share with you are some of the common struggles, at least in my experience, of those impacted or living with Lewy. The first is this insidious disease. I think the nature of the fluctuations, the grappling with the hallucinations, the uncertainty day to day, and sometimes minute by minute. There's struggles oftentimes because relationships change, relationships to spouses and partners and friends and family. Probably one of the biggest challenges that I sometimes hear about is the stigma associated with Lewy body dementia and other dementias. Dementia is often seen as a condition of decline and loss and dependence. And because of this stigma, people living with dementia have largely stated that they feel marginalized and worry that they may no longer be seen as capable or competent, or that others won't want them around anymore. Along with this, there's this term coined by a physician and author by the name of Dr. Al Power, and he calls it positioning, and it's related to stigma. Positioning refers to the tendency to make assumptions about what somebody can and cannot do, or treat them in a particular way based solely on a label of dementia. I think individuals with Lewy struggle with identity. The roles, the things that they do or did do change and transition due to this disease. Persons with dementia can often struggle with, who am I now? And this often affects their sense of self-worth. Those with dementia say that the need to have purpose and maintain purpose is instrumental to a good quality of life. Individuals, whether you have dementia or not, need to continue to feel that they can contribute in meaningful ways. And oftentimes, for people living with Lewy, that purpose is threatened. There are a multitude of losses along the way. Individuals living with Lewy often share that they have concerns over being a burden to others. And with all of this, common emotions include fear, frustration, depression, anxiety, and grief. And I've learned through meeting with thousands of caregivers that caring for a person with Lewy or Alzheimer's disease or frontal temporal dementia is profoundly challenging physically and practically for some of the same reasons. The disease and the disease of dementia doesn't directly impact caregivers, but it indirectly profoundly affects caregivers' own health and well-being. And there are changes in the relationship. The relationship changes to and toward the person living with Lewy. There are new and unexpected roles, sometimes every single day, and at the same time, everyday demands of them. There are changes in family dynamics. In some families, there is a lot of acceptance and support. And in other families, there may be individuals in denial who resist or pull away. Care partners, I think, feel or perceive the expectation of others in this new caregiving role. And I certainly think they put on expectations of themselves and what they feel they ought or should be able to do as caregivers. I think something that's really important to note here that I hear often as a common struggle is this lack of recognition. Dementia happens gradually. It's not a catastrophic situation. So oftentimes, because of this gradual presentation of the disease, Caregivers are often under the radar. And with Lewy, there are often moments where the symptoms are not as noticeable, especially to others, meaning that I think the role of care partner and the associated stresses that go along with it can oftentimes be unnoticed or dismissed by others. And this brings in some certain unique losses. Ambiguous loss is when a person is still there, but at the same time, we're feeling some losses. And disenfranchised grief is having this grief, but not necessarily having this grief validated by others. And then finally, I just want to bring up a really common an important struggle for caregivers, and that is guilt. Guilt is often the result of refusing to acknowledge that there are some things that are out of our control, out of your control as a caregiver. And oftentimes, grief comes from a place of love. And what are caregivers guilty about? I just wrote a few things down here, but I think caregiver guilt could be pages and pages of things, right? I think caregivers feel guilty because they're having frustrations over the person living with Lewy. They might feel guilty because they feel trapped, or they feel like they're not as good of a caregiver as they feel they ought to be. Or they're feeling like they failed the person with dementia when challenges occur. Sometimes caregivers say they feel guilty because they need a break. Sometimes they feel guilty when they do take a break. Sometimes they feel guilty for not embracing and sometimes even hating the caregiver role. And ironically, sometimes there's guilt when they feel joy and happiness. So resilience, I want to talk more about this word resilience. Resilience is our ability to protect our well-being in the face of many of these challenging circumstances that I've just shared with you. Over the past 20 years, I have met hundreds of men and women, perhaps thousands, who've been diagnosed with Lewy or Alzheimer's disease or a related disorder. As I've shared now, these individuals have really shaped me. They've been my mentors and they've been my guides. They've taught me more about the experience of living with dementia than any formal education or training. And here's four things I just want to share with you that I've learned from those living with Lewy. One is that when you've met one person living with Lewy or a related dementia, you've met one person. Each and every individual is unique in their own experience and the way that Lewy and dementia will unfold. Secondly, that dementia is a medical condition and not an identity. Third, that persons living with Lewy are often more capable than we think. And number four, living a good life with Lewy is achievable. More specifically, they have taught me that people living with Lewy can be resilient, and that there are some key qualities that I have observed in the most resilient people with Lewy. Let me share some of these. Those who are resilient focus on their abilities and strengths. Keep in mind, Lewy changes some things, but not everything, and not all at once. There's an exercise I like to do with families and persons with dementia, and that is to make a list of all the strengths, all the things that they can still do. And then also to list the things they can still do with some accommodations or with some assistance. It can be so easy, I think, in our head and in our mind to fall into this state of only thinking about our losses that we lose sight of can do. We need to keep can do front and center. And that's what I see resilient people doing. Resilient people find purpose. We all need a reason to get up in the morning. We all need to feel like we matter and that we need to contribute. Attitude is key. It includes choosing a healthy attitude, and this means accepting your situation as it is. and then making the choice to focus your life through a positive lens. Sometimes I refer to this as a term called authentic positivity. Now, this is not to sugarcoat the real challenges and the heartache associated with Lewy body. Real or authentic positivity is not saying that everything is fine. Some days are hard. Some days you're going to feel sad or frustrated. At times you're going to worry, you're going to feel scared. Authentic positivity includes being honest about all of this. When we acknowledge our pain and struggle, when we allow ourselves to feel anger or any other normal emotions, these emotions, when we allow ourselves to feel them, become less stuck and we can actually cope better. I'm not saying we should wallow in your anger or pain, but we just need to give ourselves a little time and space to feel them. And finally, I have to say that the most resilient people living with Lewy find a person or a community. They do not isolate themselves. And like Richard and Joan, who you will be meeting shortly, I have learned so much about the lived experience of being a caregiver. Here's what caregivers have taught me. First, there is no caregiving roadmap. There are no easy answers. Sometimes, as a person in the healthcare profession, I want to give people a quick and easy answer. And this is a space where often that is just not the case. Secondly, that caregiving is probably the toughest role that you will ever have. Caregivers have taught me that. I've learned that caregivers need our listening ear, our non-judgmental presence, and our unconditional support. And fourth, caregivers have shown me that there is a way to be in a caregiving role and preserve your own well-being at the same time. So what do these resilient caregivers look like? What are some of the characteristics that they possess? First, resilient caregivers transition to a place of acceptance. Acceptance is transformative. Let me say, though, that acceptance is not liking or agreeing or condoning or giving in or giving up. Acceptance simply means making peace with what is. It means no longer resisting. There's this, there's this phrase out there that goes something like this: what we resist persists. Accepting moves us forward. I think resilient caregivers accept that good enough is good enough in this role, and accepting that they can't control probably most things about this situation. I think resilient caregivers have to learn new ways and new skills of communicating. In our mindfulness program, we teach communication skills. We refer to it as Aikido communication. Aikido is Japanese for peacemaking. Resilient caregivers learn to build trust and confidence in their own ability to be with difficulty. Learning to be with difficulty is critical. In our mindfulness program, the pain, the anxiety, and the fear, all of these things don't go away. But through specific practices like mindfulness, we can learn to change our relationship to the pain and the worry. We can notice it. Essentially, when we notice it and when we lean into these powerful emotions, they're less likely to linger. They're less likely to overwhelm us. And perhaps one of the most important emotions that we need to tend to is grief. Tending to our grief as a caregiver must take a front seat. And just like persons living with Lewy, resilient caregivers find a person or a community. No resilient caregiver can do this alone. So the question you may be asking yourself is, am I resilient? We are all born with a certain amount of resilience, but it's not fixed and it varies from person to person. Only often it's in the really tough times where we get to find out the true extent of our resilience. So no matter what amount of resilience you have, you can become more resilient. I have already shared with you some of the things that I have found resilient people to do, some of the characteristics that they have, some of the ways of being or cultivating more resilience can be made possible through a practice called mindfulness. Mindfulness is both a practical skill and it's a way of life that can help us tap into resilience when we need it most, when we need it in the face of really challenging situations. I want to talk a little bit about stress. Stress is rampant, I think, in the situation, both of living with Lewy and of being a care partner. Excess stress is not good for us. It has the power to severely impact our physical, our emotional, our mental well being. When we are stressed, our ability to communicate effectively, to empathize, and to provide support suffers. It can lead to tension, conflicts, misunderstandings, ultimately strains our bonds with our closest friends and family. So, what are the benefits of mindfulness? Well, one of the benefits of mindfulness is that it dials down the body's stress response. So, our body has something called a stress response. And when someone experiences a stressful event, the brain sends a signal to activate something called the sympathetic nervous system. And we're pushed into something called fight or flight mode. Fight or flight mode releases stress hormones, including adrenaline and cortisol. And you'll notice when you're in this flight or fight mode, your heart beats faster, your pulse rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up. And in fact, it's estimated that we are plunged into this fight or flight mode an average of 8 to 15 times every single day. And I'm guessing for many of you out there who are caregivers, it's on the high side of that. 15 times, maybe even more. This means that our stress hormones are being released into our bloodstream once every couple of hours. Mindfulness practice is one of the most powerful stress reduction techniques you have available. Other benefits of mindfulness include supporting the relief of anxiety, helping to regulate our emotions, and ease pain and fatigue. It increases overall our psychological well being, improves empathy, and it unlocks a new way. It doesn't take away challenges, but it gives us the tools to relate to these challenges in a different way, in a way that supports our well being as well as the well being for the person with dementia. I have to say, however, that mindfulness does not come naturally to most people. However, persons living with dementia are oftentimes much more mindful than the rest of us. Mindfulness and dementia have one very important thing in common. They're strongly linked to the present moment. So, in fact, individuals living with dementia may indeed be our best mindfulness teachers. I haven't yet actually defined what mindfulness is, and I'm going to do that in just a sec. But before I do, I actually want to just share a bit about what mindfulness is not. Mindfulness is not a panacea or cure for every ill. It's not a religion, a state of bliss. It's not mind control or emptying the mind. It's not one more thing you're supposed to do so you have another thing to harass yourself about. It's not assurance that you will always be happy, well, safe, and stress free. But mindfulness is a critical skill that can be learned and developed and put you on a path toward greater well-being. The definition of mindfulness is this: mindfulness is choosing to focus your attention on the present moment. As simple as it sounds, our minds are often not in the present. Our minds are often thinking about the past, which often includes rumination, or forward into the future, which often includes worry. Choosing to focus on the present moment includes being aware of our thoughts, our feelings, the sensations in our body, being aware moment to moment of what's going on in our environment. And here's the secret sauce: stress loses its grip on you when you take in more of your present moment experience. This is the transformative part. Stress loses its grip when you take in more of your present moment experience. And this, my friends, is not easy. I also just want to share one additional definition of mindfulness. A beautiful definition of mindfulness practice is that mindfulness is wholehearted, unrestricted cooperation with the unavoidable, meeting whatever happens in the moment and making room for all of it, even the painful, ugly stuff. Acceptance is not defeat or passivity, but rather a radical honesty about what's happening right now and staying present with it rather than spending and expending precious energy trying to resist it or pretend that it isn't happening. So if I've piqued your curiosity about mindfulness, you may be asking yourself, where do I start? And one of the things that I know you're going to be receiving, I think it might be in the chat later, you might get it in a follow-up email, is I just want to share briefly with you some resources for those of you who might be interested in exploring mindfulness. One is Presence Care. You can go to Presence Care. There's information here about some of the mindfulness-based dementia caring programs that are out there and being offered. There's a whole host of apps and websites. Again, you'll have access to them, but I just put them up here for you to take a glance at. And there's also, yes, oops, I just want to go back. There's also a variety of books. And I've just listed here some of those that I recommend. So access to these resources for you to explore mindfulness is there. But before I end and before we just turn it over and have a conversation with Joan and with Richard, I just want to introduce you to three mindfulness practices: the stop practice, mindful awakening, or mindful walking rather, and breath awareness. I want to start just by briefly describing to you the stop practice. And it's as the name implies, it's a simple practice. Stop, take a breath, observe, and proceed. And this is one of the favorite practices of dementia care partners, I think, because it can just be fit into your day anytime and literally takes 30 to 60 seconds. So the 4 steps: stop means taking a purposeful pause from your current activities. Take a breath means turning your attention to your breath and finding where it is noticeable in your body. I think in this practice, you want to slow your breathing down, emphasizing the exhalation. So when you breathe in, I think about making that a count of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you exhale, making that a count of 6. Why? Because the slow breathing on the exhale activates that parasympathetic nervous system, and it dials down our stress activated nervous systems. 1 or 2 slower exhales is really all that it takes. Observe means paying attention to the present moment experience, what's happening in your body, in your mind, in your environment. You essentially get a chance to check in with yourself in simple fashion. And then number four, with this pause, you can now choose how to respond and how to proceed with this newly acquired awareness. You're asking yourself, if this is what I am noticing, what might I be needing right now? How might I proceed from here for myself and for my partner? Mindful walking is really just as the name implies, but it is going out and mindfully paying attention to your walking, not allowing your mind to just be caught up in all of the stories and the struggles and the what ifs and the ruminations and the worries, removing yourself from that and going out, perhaps in nature, and walking. This is one I really encourage doing as a partner, person with Lewy as well as their care partner, and matching your pace, which may be, especially for some of your care partners, slowing things down, feeling the sensation of the footsteps, paying attention to what feelings are coming up, and then really taking in as you're walking the sights, the smells, the sounds, the noticing of your beating heart, the warmth of your body, feeling and noticing the sensation of breath and breath as it changes. And then when the mind starts to wander, you're going to bring it back again to the sights, the sounds, the smells. What you are doing here is you are taking yourself out of this overloaded, stressful creation that your thoughts and your minds give to you, and you're bringing yourself back to peace, which exists in the present moment. And finally, I just want to, I'm actually going to stop here and bring Joan and Richard in, and we may do one more practice at the end that will give you an example of that breath awareness practice. So with that, I'm going to bring my friends and my fellow caregivers, Joan and Richard, back in to say hello. And I'm going to have some discussion with Joan and Richard in just a minute. I'm going to pose some questions to them. But prior to doing that, I'd just like to give you an opportunity to see their faces and to have each of them just take a minute or so to introduce themselves. So Joan, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. I had to figure out how to unmute there. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm sitting outside today because today is a difficult day. I had planned one thing for my husband and that didn't work out. And there are some lawnmowers in the background. So if you hear that, that's what's going on. Angela, you wanted me to start by just
a little bit about yourself, just about a minute or so. Yeah, I gave you a brief introduction, but anything more you want to share?
Yeah. Okay, so my husband was diagnosed about a little over 4.5 years ago with Alzheimer's. We made a decision in the very beginning to tell everyone, which I was very proud of him because I thought that really came from a point of strength. And we got a great deal of support from friends and family because we presented it as a disease. And that's how we've proceeded. February of 2020 was COVID. I couldn't breathe for a year. In the second year, I figured out how to start taking over some things. But by the third year, I realized that I was really starting not to feel like myself. I was stressed so much of the time. I had these constant rushes of adrenaline, and I would just have to, take a moment and try to breathe. But I've never been a mindful person. I've never been a yoga person. I've been, everything I do, I get out there and I like go for it. And I had to change. And what mindfulness has done for me is that it's helped me to understand how to run a marathon. not to view this as a series of sprints, because you won't make it to the end, and that everything is transient, and that I can, try to get through this. So I'm in the middle, in a kind of a difficult phase. I feel like we've just gone through a transition, and I'm, doing my best to use these practices and keep breathing, and give us the best life that we can have.
Thank you, Joan. Richard.
Thanks for having me, first of all. I'm about 5 years post active caregiving, not post or within caregiving, post diagnosis. And in the spirit of the topic of it being about resilience, every moment is an investment in our resilience and our strength. And I've learned that sometimes resilience and strength is about weakness and succumbing to the weakness as well. You can't be guaranteed. I mean, here I'm set up for the day, and truth of the matter is, the day didn't turn out the way I wanted it to turn out. So you go with the moment. You learn to swim in the current that you find yourself in, not the current you want to be in. Because none of us want to be in this current. And so for me, the success, the dignity for my husband, my humanity is about learning to accept my weakness and celebrate that just as much as I celebrate my strength. And I've told you, Angela, from doing the mindfulness program with you, it is the simplest thing that you have to start to do, which is to take a breath. We breathe all day long. But the idea that I'm taking a breath consciously, and I can decide how charged that breath is, shifted everything. And it's small, and you build from there, just like becoming a caregiver. I didn't know, I started small, and I built from the experiences that were delivered. So recognizing you're failing is about recognizing you're succeeding. And it doesn't matter from my perspective what flavor of dementia you have. Eventually, we all end up in the same spot. And we need the community to keep us buoyed and moving along. So I personally don't get as caught up with, well, my husband has frontal temporal. Yeah, it's unique, and there are things that I need to pay attention to, but I learn and I get support, and I give support as equally to anybody else. It doesn't, our community is as wide as we allow it to be.
Thank you,
thank
Richard.
you.
Joan, as Richard was speaking, and I know the two of you now have been able to establish a really supportive bond, but any thoughts is that were floating through your head as Richard was speaking?
Well, during the program, somehow frequently I followed Richard, and I always loved that because I didn't have to have anything prepared to talk about, because what he says is always so rich that it's easy to kind of follow him, because it triggers so many thoughts. I think that he's so right about us all being in this together. Like, no matter what the diagnosis is, dementia is dementia, and it takes on many forms, and every person is different, but we're all here supporting our loved one through the long term. And this becomes our life. And it's a long disease without cure. That's a very difficult situation to be in, is to be caring for someone for years with no cure. And the path is uncertain, although the path has some commonality. And so somehow we have to set ourselves up with this community and find support for ourselves so that we can be effective over this long period of time and not lose ourselves. And I think that, being in the moment, it's a lot of moments. It's, mindfulness is being in the moment, but oh my gosh, it's a lot of moments. I added it up the other day. You and I talked about it, and my husband was diagnosed almost 1,800 days ago. That's a lot of moments. And even though it's changed over time, once you get that diagnosis, you're a caregiver. And it just takes different forms. So I think that setting ourselves up to be in the moment for that long a period of time is just, it's a very difficult thing to do, and it requires a lot of resilience.
Yeah. Richard, any thoughts to that?
Funny, I try not to do any forensics. I live strictly in the moment. I am like a little labradoodle that you leave the house, and if you come back 10 minutes later, you're back 10 minutes later. I'm in that moment only. And that's part of how I have tried to be as imperfectly successful as I've been. Because otherwise you get caught up with how come I did not recognize or what will be tomorrow. And I can only successfully be in my moment.
Yeah, as you're speaking, Richard, I'm thinking about a conversation Joan sent to me a week or so ago. And she's like, we just need to talk more about guilt. We need to talk more about guilt because it's just kind of flying at me from all directions. And I think what you just spoke about, Richard, is one of this. I don't know if I want to go so much as say it's a strategy or a skill, but it's a choice you make in terms of a way of being. That how mindfulness and being in the moment has you less rehearsing all of these things to feel guilty about. Can you speak a little bit more to guilt for yourself, Richard, and how that shows
Ooh,
up and how you find a way to find some ease with it?
I don't think you ever find ease with it. It is what it is. And you feel guilty because you love, just be like we grieve because we love. It is part of the fabric of being part of a community that has a depth. But I do not let it, it does not steer the ship. It lets me know if I need to slow down. It lets me know sometimes I need to pay attention to this moment. But it is not going to, it can't stop a decision I need to make as long as my North Star has held on, which is, for me, it has been his dignity and my humanity. And as long as I have not lost focus of that, then my guilt is about things that I wish would be, but really aren't ever going to be. And so I sit down at my permanent reservation for one and cry into my teacup and only allow one cupful. And then I get up and I continue on. And I try not to visit that table so frequently that it becomes comfortable. So guilt shouldn't be comfortable, but a reminder that I'm still part of a world. That's the difference for me. And it could be that I got a therapist for my bat mitzvah at 13, so I really was able to filter it out.
right? Guilt and all of
Mm.
these emotions that we sometimes think of as bad, or that we don't want them, or that we want to brush away, the guilt, the pain, the anger, the frustration, whether we're living with Louis or a care partner, right? When we think about it, they're part of what our humanity. They're part of what makes us human. And I don't think guilt would be as strong or pervasive if we didn't love. So sometimes when I think about guilt, oftentimes what's behind it is a person. And then there's opportunities for forgiveness of myself, or just giving myself a break or a bit more ease when I recognize where it's coming from, that source of love. Joan, you want to say anything more about guilt?
Yeah, so I think that guilt and resilience oppose each other. And I think that if we can work on the guilt part, we can be more resilient. When Bruce was first diagnosed, I got together with a friend who had a husband who died of Alzheimer's. And she had one situation that she felt tremendous guilt about, and PTSD, and does to this day. And I looked at her and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, that could be me. And I have to figure out how not to let that happen. Well, this week I had my first situation where I felt the guilt creep in. And I realized that Bruce, there was no place for guilt with him. It wasn't anything, it wasn't his emotion. It didn't help him that I felt guilty. It was me. It was all eating away at me. And so I think part of mindfulness is finding a way to think about things, getting in touch with your own heart and your own thought process, and saying, oh my gosh, I'm feeling something that is not productive. And I mean, it's a genuine emotion and I have to experience it, but also to understand it. And so I kind of moved on to regret, which was different than guilt. And regret is instructive because you can do something differently the next time. Guilt is the emotion that sits and eats at your heart. So I decided to let go of the guilt and stick with the regret.
And Joan, it gets me thinking about this, kind of dialing things back a little bit, as we have listeners who are, not even really sure what we're talking about with mindfulness. And if you're out there saying, I still have no idea what mindfulness is, I think Joan and Richard would say, that's okay. You can't necessarily define it or wrap your head around it until you just immerse yourself in an experience. But Joan, what would you say? What do you think for caregivers, at its basic, what are some of the tools, resilience or mindfulness tools, that might be most valuable?
Wow. So, in the course, there are so many. And as we went through it, each one kind of resonated with me. And now they're just sort of this background thing that I draw from in some way. But I have to go back to the very simple breathing exercise. I do that all day long. I stop, I take a breath, I observe the situation, and then I choose how to move forward. It's that taking a breath is that relaxing part of it, and then pausing before moving forward, I make better choices. Because sometimes our immediate gut level reaction isn't really best for our partner. So the stop practice to me is something that I can just use all day long. There's something else called the bookend that Angela knows. I love this one. Bookend is when you wake up in the morning and you go to bed at night, there's this time when you have your head on your pillow and you have your thoughts to yourself. And I find that it's a good idea to start your day fresh, thinking about what's ahead and how you want to handle things, and ending your day reflecting on the day. And I actually have this funny thing that happens to me at night where I feel like I'm part of this big caregiver community. I know that there are, millions of people doing what I'm doing. I mean, maybe they're not calling it a bookend practice, but they're thinking about how their day went and what they did and what they could do differently. And I think that there's some comfort in that, because when we're first diagnosed, it's very lonely. And I've never been a real support group person, but I do have this feeling of all of these people out there who are like me. And suddenly I'm not the minority. Maybe I am in my community, but I'm not the minority anymore. So I like the bookend practice for that.
It assures you that you are part of a shared human experience and that you are not alone, even if you're not physically with people in that moment, right, Joan?
Right. Exactly.
Richard, for you, what would you say to folks out there who are contemplating caregiving that you feel are some of the essential tools for you in your resilience or mindfulness toolbox?
For me, the most important, I think, number one, was choosing to be conscious in every moment. And it doesn't mean you're making good choices always. It's not about perfection. It's not about achievement. It's just about awareness. Because it became very clear that I was the one who was aware for both of us. So I had to be very present. And mindfulness is about just being present. And Joan is much better at being disciplined, and I'm a bit more of a Mustang in the way I go through things. I try to make sure that when my foot hits the ground in the morning, I am neutral. And that's what I say. We are going to step out of this bed neutral. Yesterday was yesterday. Today is just another day with Y. So if you can just start with just simply realizing, as I say, S is going to happen. So start in the most neutral position. And again, so I'm choosing to be conscious, a level of self-awareness. And then from there you start, for me, I started a nightly meditation body scan practice that we do, which helps me unwind and be able to try to get some sleep because it's vital for us. And it was part of my prescription for my cortisol reduction diet. Because as the caregiver, we are swamped by it. And as you mentioned, we release it, you'd say every couple hours. I would say I was a steady drip in the tap.
Every moment.
Exactly. So I then had to be conscious about, okay, how do I slow this down? How do I not allow it to take me down? One of us is going down. That is guaranteed. We both don't have to go. So it is my choice, and it's very hard as a caregiver to do it, but realize that we are the shepherds to the final gate. And I want to make sure that pasture that we walk is full of luscious, edible grass. So we are nurtured all the way there. And I have to make choices to be present in order to achieve that. And even as we speak, there's chaos going on because he's in an agitated state. And that's okay, because that's part of the resilience. That's part of being a caregiver. I can offer myself to you and offer myself to him. They're not mutually exclusive. They become a part of this. It's a newfound dynamism between them. within me. It has awakened, this journey has awakened something in me that I did not know existed. And so part of the mindfulness of caregiving is also recognizing that there are gifts that are being offered us along the way. And we need to allow that gift to come, sometimes wrapped in last week's newspaper, but receive it.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Joan, for those comments. I'm gonna kind of transition to allow some questions and conversation to come in, questions to myself or Joan or Richard or even Julia. So yeah, I think Julia will kind of help navigate us through the questions that you guys all have.
Wow. That's just about all she could say. Wow. Thank you all so much for your insight and your comments. And it was all so beautiful and touching and real. And so thank you for sharing that with everyone. So we have gotten some questions and it looks like those are coming in. So let me open these up here. Oh, and you guys are getting some reactions. Yeah, take a minute, you guys, to use your reaction button at the bottom. They're showing you some love. You'll notice some little hearts and stuff flying up that are fantastic. I don't know how we get the rocket ship ones, and there's some new ones that are really fancy, but we'll have to work on that here. Okay, so let's get started here. So any of you are welcome to answer this. So we have a woman asking, what is the group that you're all a part of and how did you find it?
I'll go ahead and take that. So I met Joan and Richard through a program called Mindfulness-Based Dementia Caring. It's offered through a nonprofit called Presence Care. It's an 8 to 9 week, 20-hour program that meets virtually. These groups start up almost every single month in different places. There's currently no cost to participating, and in the resources that you receive from Rose is information about how to navigate your way to find out more information.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And so you guys, all those resources will be available. You can look that up and hopefully this will be something you can add to your toolkit. So I think this is a really great question. And Richard or Joan, either of you or both of you can take this. A lot of times you have a lot of decisions coming at you as a care partner. So, getting wills figured out, possibly moving to a different, type of home, needing to get more predictable schedule, needing to make sure the family stays connected. And they talk about kind of the guilt of all these things that they need to be doing. So how do you manage that? And is there a way that you use, because I know you've commented to some mindfulness practices that you use this, or is there anything in your toolkit that you use, or how do you kind of cope with all of that, influx of all the things you need to do?
Part of that question is very simple. Legal documents have to be had. Medical constructs need to be put in place. Safety issues, driving, firearms, knives need to be dealt with. They're non-negotiable. It's just a non-negotiable. When you're dealing with someone who has a compromised sense of action and consequence, we have to do that just not for our families, but for society in general. So that for me was an easier part of it. As painful as it was the easy part. The other half, the other part, family decision making, I chose to be as honest and forthright, and I let the people within the family decide how they wanted to receive it. And after they came back, after how I viewed how they were receiving it, how they were choosing to partner with us, I then gave them information and responsibilities accordingly. But you are, or I will say, I encourage every caregiver to be consciously selfish. You cannot share your cup if it is not full.
Very well said. Very well said. I like that phrase so much too. I think everyone needs to, in this situation, needs to hear that and give themselves permission for that. So thank you. Anything you
And
want to
could
add,
I,
Joan?
yeah, I'd like to add a couple things. It's a big load when you start going through all of those things. The legal things are one thing. Finance. My husband handled all of our finances. He did trades. He was managing our money. Auto pays, credit cards, things that are in his name, my name. You start going through the American Express bill and you realize if he was the one who was handling it, I mean, we're paying for a bunch of stuff that we don't even get or use. The list is kind of endless. And my advice would be pick off the important ones and make sure you don't delay. Do the things that really matter and don't get bogged down by the whole list, but make sure you take care of those important ones first, because once they're in place, you're going to feel a lot better. You get this great sense of accomplishment, safety, security for both of you, and then you can move forward with just the day-to-day caregiving.
Very well said. And I think that, speaks so much to that need to prioritize and how hard that can be to anything that you wanted to add, Angela, just from other experiences you've heard.
No, I think that was kind of, as you mentioned, I think prioritizing, recognizing, and giving yourself forgiveness, I guess, is the one thing I would add when you don't get through even the first thing on your list because the day just took a pivot, to just recognize. And I think as Richard said, you get up the next day just neutral, and go to bed knowing you did the best you can, and wake up the next morning and see what you can tackle again.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is such a great question. Um, how do you cope with trying to do something for yourself and your partner's need for you to be there all the time? Who would like to take that one first?
I'm living it in real time right this second. So I didn't know at this ripe old age that I'd learned to parent. And that's what we're doing. We're parenting. And so you have to have humor about it. I'm not as long as no one's in danger, for me, that is the line. If safety is still in place, then if you can't handle his head popping into this Zoom call right now and then him given, not my problem, right? It's okay. I don't have the cute little puppy dog running through the office. I have him instead. You have to just realize what is important. And it's important for me to be here because it makes me, as Joan was saying, part of community and keeping that network, and that keeps me alive and filled, but also the chaos on the other side of the screen is just as important.
Absolutely. And you're in forgiving company here for sure. I think everyone definitely understands. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to add to that too. The other word that comes to my mind with, what do you do in the situation where you really have no alone time? The person with dementia is just wanting to be present with you, 24/7. The word that comes to my mind is empathy. And I think about the reason why. Why would somebody with dementia want to latch on, and literally kind of absorb all of your time? And if you think about the experience of living with dementia, and things that we all need, I think part of the reason why that occurs is that we all have an innate human need to feel connection, to feel safe, to be with people who feel familiar, to be with people who we know love us. So I think there's an emotional need for that attachment that they're finding close to you. And the other thing is sometimes, depending on the stage of dementia, people are just not sure what to do next. And so by staying close, you're sort of a guide in instructing them through the day and what's next.
Well said.
Can
Would you
I
like
add
to
just
add
one
anything, Jill?
quick thing? Yes. Um, so I think it's important to, really pay attention to their needs and their emotional needs, because at the end of the day, if he's happy, I'm happy. If he's calm, I'm calm. And if my going out is going to cause a huge problem, I really have to look at what I'm going to do and how important is that. But then when I'm out, here's where mindfulness comes in. Be out. I have a bad habit of taking my phone and looking at the Ring camera. And that's not good. You have to set yourself up with somebody at home who is going to be enjoyable and take care of your person. And when you're out, make the most of that time and be present with that time as well, because that'll go a lot further. And sometimes it's not quantity, it's quality.
That is very well said. And that, I'm sure, has to be so hard to do, to just shut it off and take that time for yourself. A question, I'm going to try to phrase a question that came through. So that can be really demanding. All of this is very demanding, but not having time to yourself. And are there ever any times that either of you have any kind of dark thoughts, or and how do you cope with those? Maybe how do you work through that? And I'm sure there's probably some guilt or negative feeling that comes through with that.
I'll be brutally honest. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and how you cope with it. You cope with it again by choosing to be conscious of where it is originating from. So I allow it to come through because I know why it's coming through. And it is also, it's attached to the loss that's all around me and I have no control over. So then I try to backtrack to, okay, what do I have control over? I have control over being able to at least sit in his presence. I have control over knowing that today will end in a Y. I have control over the fact that I know I have my standing reservation at my pity table if I need to go there and have my time out. And it's part of where choosing to be conscious, mindful, however you want to say it, helps you bridge that moment and make sure you continue to take in oxygen. Because if we allow it to overwhelm us, that's when we stop breathing. And I don't mean necessarily literally, right? So how do we make sure that we just take in enough to get us through to where we kind of reinvest in strength again and recognize? And that is the definition of resilience for me. Allowing that darkness to descend, but not completely set down. Very long ago, I took in the thought that despair is greedy. Despair will take over everything. Hope wants to feed and share with everybody. And so I am committed to, at a minimum, holding on to a thread of hope and start nibbling my way back.
Richard said that so beautifully. And I think the question is such a good one. And it really is, I think, the core of mindfulness. We spend a lot of time talking about these unhelpful mind states, these dark places that our mind goes. And it does for all of us. And as mentioned, as Richard said, part of mindfulness, part of this exploration is learning to be with the difficulty, to lean in to these difficult challenges. And when we do, they actually do not hold us hostage. They're not so overwhelming when we do. There's this really simple technique out there that is called name it to tame it. And it's this idea that just by naming our emotion, that just, sort of spending a few moments with it to name it, allows it to relinquish a little bit of its hold on us.
I like that idea. Name it to tame it. Joan, anything you want to add to that?
Um, I would just say that I think most of my dark thoughts are around grief. I'm really afraid of grief. I experience grief all the time, but I know how bad grief can be. And so I think the dark thoughts are, the day-to-day grieving over something that's lost in him, or possibly it's the grieving over a life that I had and don't have. It's the grieving over what's coming, having him here but not, maybe, and then the ultimate grief at the end. So I think the dark thoughts for me, as Angela said, if you can name it, you can tame it. I think I would say that's where my dark thoughts reside. And I recognize that, and I recognize that you really can't avoid grief. So the trick is just moving along and moving through it. But yeah, there are definitely a lot of dark thoughts along the way.
Absolutely. And
And
thank
I
you
hope
all for
I
talking
hope one of
about
the
that.
things that came out of that really good question is just a sense of relief for any of the care partners out there to know that we all care partners, we all hold these dark deep. You are not alone in that. You are, as Joan mentioned earlier, you are with a family and a community who share that.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being willing to go there so beautifully and eloquently. There's a great question here. I think anyway, this really speaks to me for sure. So how can I deal with a tendency to perfectionism? And I think that, that's something a lot of times that can hold people back. So this individual says, I want to make the perfect decision, and it stops me.
I'm going to lean in first of all, and then I'm pretty sure Joan and Richard will have a thought about this. But, one of the things I discovered in the first many years that I was spending with a lot of caregivers and saw different ways that people manage the caregiving, care partnering experience was that the caregivers who struggled the most, especially in their own health and well-being, were those caregivers who wanted to be A+ caregivers. They wanted perfection. They strove for perfection. And I am here to tell you it is not possible in this situation. And to just sort of succumb to being maybe a B- or even a C+ caregiver will probably and very much probably will make things go better for you and everybody else involved. It does mean kind of giving up those perfectionistic tendencies. And I think for some of us, that's sort of what's gotten us through life. But here's a place where it's probably not going to work so well.
And I'd say it's a very simple axiom. Imperfection is perfection. Full stop.
That's excellent. That is excellent. Anything for you, Joan?
Yeah, I would just say if your bar is too high, you'll never experience any success. And I think you need to experience success as a caregiver every day. So you have to be realistic about what that looks like. And for me, I think what brings me resilience and the ability in the marathon not to hit the wall at marker 20 and make it to the end is feeling good about what I'm doing every day. And if that bar is too high, we can all make the bar as high as we want. If it's too high and you can't achieve it, then you're done.
Very, very well said. Do you guys have any final insights or words of wisdom that you want to share before? I know we're going to have Angela do a little closing practice, and we're going to do some final words.
For me, Joan hit on the most important thing, and that is to realize we're part of a community. And isolation and sense of isolation is going to show up. You just have to know that there's a phone call you can make, a group that you can log into, a resource to access. And again, it goes back to, do not let despair completely obliterate hope. And communities, for me, part of how I keep my hope alive.
So true. So true.
So mine would be, don't wish for something you can't have. You know, we could all sit here and I have a lot of friends that travel in September. They're going to wonderful places. And, you know, we would have been doing that. But there's no point in wishing for something that we can't have. And I found peace with that somehow. I'm actually shocked. But if you can find peace with what your life is now and what you have and some day-to-day pleasures, I think the time is much more worthwhile.
So true. So true. Thank you. So, Angela, do you want to do your closing practice first, or do you want me to say the final words and then you'll take us out with that? Which do you prefer?
I'm going to say, you know what, why don't, I'm going to say just some closing thoughts. If you want to then say some final words, and then I'm going to let Richard, are you ready just to kind of have a couple minutes of, okay. Yeah. So let me just kind of, I think Richard and Joan already did a beautiful summary of what we've talked about here. I think succumbing and not resisting our weaknesses and our dark spaces, I think is extraordinarily important to validate and to recognize that as humans, we are going to have them. That there is really hope in the breath. And I know it sounds simple, and I hope those of you who maybe have not explored it in terms of a mindfulness practice will find ways to do that. And the final words I'm going to say actually come from Joan. Joan sends me her beautiful words all the time, and I relish in them. And it goes back to a common theme we've heard right today, which is the theme of community. And she says, I need to talk things out, but I have never felt so incapable of expressing how hard my days are, and I keep the pain in my heart to myself. She's realized through all of this that she didn't realize how much I think all of us as caregivers need to be understood, and how much we need to have the feeling of community. Joan says, as different as we all are, I see the struggle of my classmates, my fellow caregivers, and know that there is a whole sea of people out there doing this who get it. It's like an alternative universe in homes all across the world. And I love that this webinar essentially got to bring this universe together for this period of time. So, Julie, I'll let you take over, and then let's finish off with Richard.
Excellent. That was so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And so, you guys, if you're used to my words being closing words, stay on if you can. Richard's going to do some closing with us, but this was just such an amazing discussion. So I'd like to thank you all, Richard, Joan, Angela, for taking time out of, I know how busy your days are. And so taking this time to share your expertise with all of us. For everyone out there, you know, if you missed part of it, or you were late, or you want to watch it again, or maybe you want to share it with friends who you feel like don't get it. You're gonna get an email with a link for the recording in about a week. You can also go to that landing page on our website, and you can register for those upcoming ones, or also find the link for this one. And we're going to see you in just a week, so you won't be missing us for long. Next Tuesday, September 25th at 2:30 Eastern Time, we're going to be joined by Dr. Darla Freeman, who is a speech language pathologist, to learn about swallowing difficulties and how you can cope with those. And so after we log out, please do that survey for us. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Richard and say thank you to all of you.
Thank you. And my husband will be popping in and out as the video allows it. I just really invite everyone to just take a breath and kind of sit in everything you have experienced in this dialogue, the emotions, the uncomfortable body position you found yourself in. And breathe it out and realize, as I say, I woke to meet another day. It's promise, a bit of yesterday. It's hope, a bit of tomorrow. But in it, I am resilient. And that is all of us as caregivers. That is all of us as beings that choose to be living with empathy and love, and also surrendering to that which is in front of us and finding the joy in that. With that, I breathe out deeply and thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to be with you.
Thank you all.